You're listening to Wise Women with Daisy Khan, where faith rolls up its sleeves as a force for good, and where women define the future with wisdom and wonder. I'm Daisy Khan, author, speaker, and a Muslim woman who spent her life wrestling with the messy, miraculous collision of faith and real life. And kindly subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Welcome to Wise Women with Daisy Khan. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Sally Quinn, a legendary figure in both American journalism and also a diehard spiritual seeker. As a celebrated reporter and editor at the Washington Post, she covered DC power players and became part of the Capitol's inner circle. Sally created the groundbreaking On Faith section at the Washington Post, bringing religious discourse into the mainstream media when faith was often relegated to the margins. I want to thank you, Sally, for doing that because you invited me as a contributor, and I remember how important it was at that time because Islam was basically completely misunderstood, and you gave me an opportunity to write these On Faith blogs on all the topics that were being discussed in the press. So thank you very much for that.
Well, you were a great addition, Daisy. You were one of my big stars.
Thank you. Thank you. But Sally has also written several books, including Finding Magic, and her latest book, which is right here, Silent Retreat, which explores faith, love, and human experience with remarkable candor. What makes Sally's voice so compelling is her journey from being an atheist journalist to becoming a woman of deep faith, a transformation that brings refreshing honesty to how she writes about the search for spirituality and also how sensuality are parts of the fullness of a human being. So, Sally, you've been very much a prominent person in the journalistic field, but on a personal front, you have had this remarkable journey from being an atheist to becoming a woman of deep faith. Was that the turning point when your heart turns towards the spiritual realm?
I was an atheist since I was 6 years old. I didn't know the word then, but I remember my parents making me go to Sunday school, and I didn't buy it. I just would go in there, and I kept thinking, why are we worshiping a God who would kill his own son? It didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't want to worship that person who would do that to his child. So that was my, I liked Jesus, but I didn't like God. And I didn't believe, and I didn't know what God was, but I didn't feel like worshiping a God who would do that. And when I was about 13, I announced to my father that I was an atheist. He almost went crazy. We were living in Greece, and he went to Paris on a business trip, and he came back, and he brought me these gorgeous French black suede pointed toe heels, my only first high heels. I mean, tiny heels, but, and he said, I'll give you these if you go to church.
Well, that's great.
So I said, okay, great. So I put on my heels and I go to church, and I walk all the way down the aisle to the front seat so everybody could see me. All the other girls in my class could see that. And I don't think he had any idea that I was bluffing, but he bribed me, and it didn't work. And so I continued. Yes, after my son was born, and he was born with a hole in his heart, and he almost died. He had open heart surgery, and he was sick in the hospital for the first 16 years of his life. And then, he's still 43 now, but he still has a lot of medical problems and learning disabilities. But that didn't influence me at all in my feelings. I learned not to say why me, because it's not fair to say why me when I have such a good life. I mean, basically my attitude is, why not me?
Yeah.
I mean, I look at all these people suffering in Gaza and Ukraine, and I can't say why me, because look what's happened to them. So then as a journalist, I got interested in religion as a story around the time of the Iran war, and then our invasion in Kuwait, and that people didn't understand Islam. That was what really got me into it. I just thought there was such a misunderstanding of this faith. And I went to the editor and I said, you know, we're missing a story here. There's a really fantastic story. And I wrote memo after memo after memo, and nothing happened. So I went to the publisher of the paper, Don Graham, and I said, Don, we're not covering the story. He said, well, why don't you do a religion website? I said, Don, I don't know anything about religion. I don't know anything about the internet. He said, well, nobody's perfect. So he sent me over to Virginia. We didn't have it in the Washington Post at the time. We didn't have a website. It was in Arlington. So I went over across the bridge and worked in this building and built up this website. And because it was new, nobody knew what it was doing. I got John Meacham, who was a wonderful writer of faith, was my co-moderator. And I started looking for stars like you. I wanted people to talk about their faith and lack of faith. So
Yeah.
I had everybody on the show. I mean, I had Muslims, I had Jews, I had Christians, I had Hindus, I had atheists, whatever. I don't care, with snake handlers, whatever you were. I wanted to see what people believed in. That was
Yeah.
because religion has been such a driving force in the world over the thousands of years.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, I don't understand this. I want to know what this is about. And it was the most fascinating time of my life
Mm.
professionally. I just got really, my husband couldn't believe it because, wait a minute, you're an atheist.
Yeah.
I went
Yeah.
to lunch with John Meacham, my my co-moderator, who was then editor of Newsweek. And we were having lunch, and I told him I was an atheist. He said, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, you're not. I said, John, I'm an atheist. He said, you're not, because you're not a negative person. And if you
Mm.
were an atheist, that means that you're against God. And how can you be angry at a God that you don't believe in if you
Yeah.
don't? And so he gave me a list of books to read, said, come back and tell me you're an atheist after you've read these books. And so I went through this reading list, and I was blown away by what I saw, because there were so many brilliant people who were people of faith, all
Yeah.
different faiths. I just absorbed it. I was just in shock. It was one of the most fascinating reading experiences of my life. And so I came back to John and I said, you know, you're right. I'm not a negative person. And I can't say that there's no God. And the word agnostic doesn't mean anything to me, because that means you don't know. Well, the
Yeah.
Pope is an agnostic. I
Mm.
mean, I'm an agnostic. We're all agnostics because nobody knows. So
Mm.
that word doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And so but studying all these religions, I found things about each faith that really appealed to me, rituals and beliefs. And I sort of started, most people of faith, of one specific faith, don't like this word, but I cherry picked from all the religions. I would just choose things about each faith that I really liked and appealed to me, and incorporate them into my life. And so that, you know, there was a book that I read called A Religion of One's Own. And I realized, if I would used to say I'm not religious, well, you know, the term SBNR, spiritual but not religious. So I was an SBNR. But the fact was that I became a much more spiritual person because there were so many things about life that one couldn't understand, and certainly I couldn't, and nobody could. And what also became clear to me was that not one single person of any faith or no faith has the same views, the same beliefs, the same feelings.
Yeah.
We can all sit in church or mosque or synagogue, and every single one of those persons has a different spiritual experience. And I read Varieties of Religious Experiences. I thought that was a fascinating book. So that's how I came to be a person of faith, a person of belief.
I just wanted to find out because now you were so immersed with all these opinions that were being shared with you, especially on the On Faith blog. What did you learn from the opinions of these religious leaders that surprised you the most?
Well, ultimately, what I think, my religion is based on one thing, and it's the one thing I learned from every religious reader, which is the golden rule.
Mm. Yeah.
Do
And
unto others if you will have others do unto you. It's the one thing that makes sense. I've been trying to live my life that way. I wasn't thinking in those terms before.
Yeah, yeah. So, in your previous book, Finding Magic, you wrote about the supernatural experiences that many journalists might dismiss. I remember, Sally, when I wrote my memoir, I shared how my life was guided by spiritual dreams that actually instruct me on what I need to do next.
Mhm.
And a friend of mine said to me, "Don't say that in the book. All Americans will think you're crazy. They'll just discount you." Did your journalist friends think you had gone off the rails?
Yep.
What was that experience like?
Well, there's a lot of journalists who interviewed me, and some of the reviews made fun of that, and so woo, Sally Quinn's gone, off the rails.
Yeah,
But astrology and psychic and real
yeah.
issues like that. That
As if the other
occult.
world doesn't exist at all.
Well, so
Like there's
I
only this dimension in this world. There's only one dimension, you know?
right. Well, I mean, so what I don't understand why it's okay to make fun of those things, but not okay to make fun of religions
Right,
and what people believe and the rituals they do.
right.
And so when somebody would criticize me and say, "Do you go to church or synagogue or a mosque?" And they would say yes. And I say, "What do you do?" "Well, we say the Lord's Prayer and we do this and we do that." And I say, "Well, why? I mean, what is that about? How can you prove any of that? It's all crazy." And they didn't quite understand that it's all the same. It's all about spirituality and knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and belief. It's all about beliefs. And if something makes you feel good, and it works for you, then why not?
Hmm.
As long as nobody else is getting hurt. But
Exactly.
I always, the contempt people have for the occult and the spiritual is baffling to me.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
long they'll believe what they believe, but then anybody else is crazy.
yeah. Yeah, it's like the virus. None of us can see it until we put it under the microscope,
Yeah.
So, but yet we believe it's there. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, so going back to your just released book, congratulations, Silent
Thank you.
Retreat. Your protagonists are very interesting people. Can't go into the full details of the book, but they seem to be secluded at this retreat, a silent retreat, no less, where they find romance, love, intimacy in an ambiance of spirituality. And you know, Sally, in our culture, we often separate the sacred and the sensual as if they're completely incompatible. But your book suggests otherwise. Were you trying to disprove that or show people how they can embrace their complete selves as spiritual beings?
Well, you just nailed it, Daisy. That was the whole point of the book, was to show people that, well, it's the difference between agape and eros. Agape being the emotional and psychological love, and eros being the sexual love.
Mm-hmm.
And they go together. I mean, that's what marriage is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, these two people are both um, they're coming to this retreat where their lives are falling apart, and they're sort of desperate to sort themselves out, and they meet and they fall in love, but it's a silent retreat, and so they can't speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the book is them not speaking, but there are these monks who are counselors. You can go sit with the counselor and talk. And so that's how I got the dialogue in there and the content, because they would be able to talk to the monk and tell the monk their backstory.
Mm-hmm.
And I first went to a silent retreat while I was doing On Faith. And I belonged to this group called Path North, which is about people doing well by doing good. And we had a field trip once. So we went to the silent retreat in Virginia, and this beautiful farm on the Shenandoah River, gorgeous place, and very serene and silent and beautiful. And I didn't know whether I was going to work for me or not. My husband died laughing. He said, "If you can be silent for 3 days, I'll never believe it."
I can't be silent. I don't know how you did it because I have a monologue going in my head like 90 miles an hour. I have no idea how to stop that.
Well, yeah. So the thing is, um, I didn't know whether I'd be able to hack it or not either. And we went there, and the first night we were sitting around this U-shaped horseshoe shaped table. We were in silence by that time. They were playing Gregorian chants on the speaker.
Mm.
And we all sat there, served ourselves, sat down, ate quietly, silently, didn't talk, and then got up and washed our dishes and went down to our room. And I was really put off by that at first because I thought it's so rude that you're sitting next to somebody and you're not talking to them. Because
Yeah.
my idea of sharing a meal is sharing, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I actually got to the point where I was relieved I didn't have to make conversation.
Mm.
And there were services at the chapel. This is a Catholic monastery,
Right.
and
Right.
there were services throughout the day you could go to or not go to. So I went to 3 or 4 a day. And it was the monks would come in, the candlelight, and they would pray and they'd pray and chant, and I would sit there and meditate or pray or whatever you want to call it. Um, and and it just made me feel so calm and so relaxed and so peaceful. And I had this wonderful monk who was my counselor, and I went to see him, and my husband developed dementia during the
Mm.
time I was
I
going there,
remember that. I remember.
and he ultimately died. And this one monk just got me through this whole thing.
Mm.
He was fabulous and most wonderful person, dear, kind. He was in the early 80s, and he was a friend of Thomas Merton, the famous
Oh,
theologian.
yeah. Wonderful.
And he really was his friend. And so we had these great conversations, and I'd cry all through the session.
Mm.
And I'd take long walks down by the river in the Shenandoah, and it was just a magical time for me. And I kept thinking, this place is so romantic, but it's a very spiritual place. But there's something very sensual about it,
Mm.
about the river and the farm and the cows lowing and
Yeah.
the mysticism of the services. But I found that was a time where you would think in a silent retreat you'd be thinking about yourself all the time
Mm.
and finding yourself. And what I was trying to think about was how do I, how can I be happy, and what can I do to make me feel better? And there's this wonderful book called The Good Life by this Harvard psychiatrist Robert Waldinger.
Mm.
Came out a couple of years ago as a bestseller, and it was about this grant study they had at Harvard in the late 30s and early 40s, where they studied all these sort of high-powered men from prominent families and had money and smarts and everything. And they followed them through their entire lives. And my husband was a member of the grant study. He was
Mm.
one of, and Jack Kennedy was too. There were about 200 people altogether.
Wow.
And they traced their lives. And Waldinger has written this book about it. And he also is a Zen priest, a Buddhist priest. And I do meditation with him once a week on
Mm.
Zoom. But one of the things that I started thinking about was I wanted to be a better person, and I wanted to do what made me happy. I realized was helping other people. I realized that when my husband was so sick, I didn't have a nurse. I took care of him until he died. He was 93 and he had eight for 8 years. That I was really happy while I was taking care of him. I just felt
Mm.
totally fulfilled. And
Mhm.
he was so happy and so grateful and so loving. And may have been the 2 happiest years of our marriage.
You remember Swanee Hunt, right?
Yeah,
She also talks about that because when her husband Charles was passing away, she spent all this time with him, and she said that was the best moments of her life together.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And people can't believe it, but I can't believe it either. But it was just the most intimate,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful, loving time of my life. This is recently I learned this. The Dalai Lama says that it's good to be selfish.
Mm.
And I thought, well, what does that mean? It's good to be selfish. We said, if you're selfish, you want to be happy. So you'll do what makes you happy.
Yeah.
And the reason that's what makes people happy is caring about other people and taking care of other people.
Yeah.
So if you do that and you're selfish, you're going to help other people if that
Yeah.
makes you happy. And I realize that's the thing that makes me happiest. My
Yeah.
taking care of my son, taking care of my friends, um, pulling people together, creating a community of affection and love and
Mhm.
admiration. And so so I do that to make myself happiest.
Well, this is so, I mean, I have so many thoughts that I could exchange with you, but I think that going back to your book, I also wanted to share with you that the Quran does not separate the spiritual from the physical
I
and
know.
sees it
That
as
was one of the things that I
completely
was
integrated. Yeah.
that was one of the things that I found so compelling about Islam.
Mm. Yeah, it views it as a sexuality as a natural,
Right.
blessed part of human experience, especially when expressed within the framework of a committed, loving relationship. When we
Exactly.
talk about this study that was done and what makes people happy is having these great relationships, and physical intimacy within marriage is seen as, in the words of the Quran, as worship, if you can
Yeah.
believe that,
Yeah.
when approached with the right intention, because intimacy serves the larger purpose of
Right.
not only creating this loving relationship, but families and then the continuation of humanity,
Yeah.
because out of procreation, you have children, and then that
Yeah.
is humanity. So there's so much more to this than just, oh, it's not the sin of the flesh, it's actually a blessing.
Well, one of the things that this guy, the Robert Waldinger, who wrote this book, talks about, he wrote a piece recently about the importance of relationships,
Mm.
and that the study shows that for all these Harvard men that they studied, and what they came out with at the end of their lives, it wasn't money or fame or success that made them happy. It was having a good relationship,
Yeah.
and not just with their spouse, but with friends and family. But a loving relationship with somebody you're in love with. I mean, the sexuality is so much a part of that that I don't see how you can separate them because it makes such a difference.
Well, intimacy connects you in a way that
Yeah.
nothing else can. When you're writing these books, Sally, do you think that they are aiding you in your own spiritual growth? I'm saying that from experience because every book that I've written now, I've written three books and three very different types of books. Each time I feel like each book is adding to my own spiritual growth.
I think so. I do a lot of research for my book, so I learn a lot. And this latest book, I did a lot of research on Catholicism and Christianity and the role that love plays and the role that eroticism plays and that spirituality plays. And it just clarifies so much to me. I think that's what writing does for me is it clarifies.
So, does your investigative background help you to explore faith
Oh,
differently?
yeah. I know how to research and I know where to go to look for things. I'm putting together a sequel for the novel right now.
Mm.
And I'm also working on my Washington memoir.
Oh,
But in the
that'll be
sequel,
interesting because there'll be a lot of interesting names in there.
yeah,
Is it an
yeah.
exploratory?
Well, a lot of people are going to have to die before I can print this book. But I learned so much. I'm doing research this whole weekend. I'm in a workshop
Mm.
of something that's going to be in the sequel, and I'm just learning so much. I have all these new experiences, like
Yeah.
going to the silent retreat. That was an incredible experience. It's something I would never have done on my own because I probably wouldn't have thought about it.
Mm.
But then it was so helpful to me in just um, advancing my spiritual life, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any one big spiritual lesson you learned from the silent retreat?
Oh, that's that's a hard question, Daisy. I mean, I mentioned before that one of the spiritual lessons that always works for me is the golden rule, and the other one is what makes me happy is helping other people. So those are lessons, but I'm not sure that they came out of the spiritual retreat.
Mm.
Um, what came out of the spiritual retreat, I guess, would have to say that the conflict between love and guilt and pain and anguish and despair and happiness and lust and all those things, that we all have all those emotions, and that people are so judgmental about other people's lives and how they live them. And what came out of it was the most important thing. I have a wonderful platter in my bedroom is a quote by Oscar Wilde, and it says, "Be yourself. Everybody else is taken." And
That's a
and
good one.
and I just sort of felt, I've got to, accept myself as I am. And
Mm,
at that point, I was about to be a widow, and then a
mm,
widow, and then accept myself as I am, and try to make the most of it rather than try to be somebody else. I
yeah.
think authenticity is that's what I gotten out of it.
You have covered politics for so many decades, and I'm wondering, the spiritual lens that you now have, how do you view this current division in America from a spiritual lens? What do you think is really going on?
Well, Washington, of course, is totally toxic.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't even breathe here.
yeah,
And I have an astrologer friend of mine who says Washington is spiritual hardship post.
yeah,
But I think the whole country, actually, I think the whole world is in a spiritual hardship post right now.
yeah,
And I think that somebody said the other day, Donald Trump says, "Make America great again." And I think that this person said what he thinks is that we should say, "Let's make America good again."
yeah,
Because the thing is, we're not good anymore. We're not good people.
yeah,
We're people who accept breaking the law and violating norms and values and ethics, and the suffering that's been caused by this administration in the last 5 months is just shocking. And the suffering not only here but all over the world. I mean, AIDS, taking all that money, and their children dying right now of starvation and disease because we took that money away and spent it on a military parade. We've got to find somebody, a leader of this country, who cares about other people and who cares about goodness, decency, kindness, honesty, honor, who's an honorable person,
yeah,
and make people understand that treating other people badly is not the way to go. Violence is not the way to go.
yeah,
Anger, contempt. This just doesn't work.
yeah,
And I mean, we've seen that in a community of thousands of years, that what I said earlier is that most religions are based on do unto others,
yeah,
that that's the only way that things can work.
yeah.
And so I would say that we have to find a leader who can lead us back to goodness.
Yeah, yeah. And but in the meantime, those of us who are in the spiritual works, we have to do our part in helping others, right? I mean, that's all we can do, what's within our own power.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I listen to certain politicians, and as a spiritual person who has had years and years of experience of, getting rid of the diseases of the heart, all those things that we learn to, expunge ourselves from this negative trait. And I listen to these people and I go, wow, these are real spiritual infants. I don't even think they've ever done any spiritual works, because how can they even think that or say that? For like, there's no spiritual evolution. We went from the evolution to like a complete setback. And I think it's like a spiritual crisis is where I think this nation is.
I think so too.
Yeah.
The crisis of, I mean, I consider myself a Christian with a small C,
Hmm.
and and this they keep talking about this being a Christian nation,
Yeah.
and the expression WWJD, what would Jesus do? I
Yeah.
don't see any one of these people asking themselves what would Jesus do and coming up with the answer of the way they're behaving.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you just have to look around the world today in Gaza, Ukraine, Iran. And I'm just wondering, as a woman, what is your instinct of what people of faith can do to address this global suffering and injustice? And I'm asking that question because I see a lot of like silence. I see a lot of spiritual bypassing. Oh, we'll just sit here on our little prayer mats and just pray for everybody, and somehow things will just go away. And isn't it the responsibility of people of faith to speak when such injustices are going on and when such global suffering is going on?
Well, it depends on what faith they are or say they are. The evangelicals called Donald Trump a baby Christian. meaning he doesn't know anything about Christianity or religion or any of the Christ-like behavior. But if people don't follow the tenets of their own religion,
Yeah.
and most religions have tenets to be decent and kind and love one another,
Yeah.
then they can't call themselves religious. They're not Christians.
Yeah.
They're not
They're just weaponizing religion.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's using it.
Hmm.
And sort of Trump certainly makes I mean, I think that it's sort of like barbarians at the gate. You put all these tough guards in front of you to ward off evil. So
Hmm.
they put all these, I think that the Republicans put all these crazy people at the gates to protect them from whatever's happening. But they're only making themselves. I mean, I look at these Republicans on the Hill and I don't understand who they are because a lot of them have been there for a long time and were respected um, and admired as being good Americans, and yet they have totally absolved any thought that they might be decent, and because when they're justifying everything that Donald Trump does, which is hurting so many people, you can't call yourself a person of faith.
Yeah. Yeah. They're completely compromised, and that's why they're bypassing everything that they believe in, you know?
Well,
Uh,
it's also the bigotry of it is just,
yeah.
or the
Yeah.
bigotry is the worst
Yeah. Yeah.
because I mean it's like anybody who's the other, anybody who's not just like you. So what we have is a lot of white middle class, middle aged men who are out there with their tattoos, carrying guns and waving the flag and calling themselves American, and that's not that. I used to think that's not who we were, but it looks like that is who we are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why so many young people have gotten turned off because they see the hypocrisy. And I know that you've lived through some personal challenges, deep personal challenges, but what keeps you resilient and what can you share with the young people who are so turned off by what they see as organized religion and they might be seeking meaning? There any words of wisdom that you can share with them?
Well, I think one of the most important words of wisdom I could share is that people should be informed. It's really important. And I think there's so many voters this year just were not informed. I think that being informed and being educated, and that's what's scary about what they're doing with education, is they're taking a lot of information out of the schools,
Yeah.
like anything about the racial justice issue in this country. We don't want people to know that we had slaves.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
want children to know that.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying when you try to quell the information, squash the information that comes to children.
Yeah.
Because if they can make up their own minds if they have the information and they have the facts.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing, is to be informed. And then I think that I think that creating a sense of community is really important too.
Mhm.
Gathering together friends and people who are like-minded and care about doing good things, and
Yeah.
either doing something or at least being gathered and sort of reinforcing your own ethics and values and morals around people who you believe and trust in.
Yeah.
And
I'm so glad you mentioned about education because a few days ago I interviewed a friend of mine, Madam Q, for Juneteenth special, and she's an African American educator. She said that Sister Clara Muhammad, who is a very well known person, but you and I may not know who she was. She started homeschooling. She initiated it because she didn't want to send her children to school. When her children used to go to school, they used to come back and they would complain that they were told you were monkeys in Africa. We brought you here and we tamed you and all this other stuff. And they would cry. They would say, were we really monkeys? And then she said, the hell, I'm going to start teaching my kids at home. And she started homeschooling, and then the police came to her. And so she stood her ground. And as a result of her, lots of other homeschools began. And she actually started the homeschooling movement.
that's amazing. I didn't
And
know
then
that
none
story.
of us would know that, right? And though she was talking about how important it is to teach some of this history in school so that you're not teaching it to make white people feel guilty because no one should carry the burden of another, right? Or your ancestor. You just acknowledge that it happened. I mean, part of healing from a trauma is for people that trauma to be acknowledged. Yes, it
Absolutely.
I mean, that's like step number one. When somebody's committed some sin against you or done something to you, you just acknowledge that, and that
Yeah.
is part of the healing process. So that I'm so glad you mentioned that. So I also know that you said that let's sit together around a table, and I know both of you, both of us, you and I, thrive on conversation and connection.
Hmm.
Sally, I've been interviewed by many journalists in my lifetime, but I've never been invited to one's dinner party except by you.
Really?
I don't know if you remember inviting me to your
I
home.
do. I do. Yeah.
I was seated right next to TJ Jakes. And
TD Jakes. Yeah. Isn't he
yeah, yeah.
fabulous? Yeah.
Oh my God, I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
And after 9/11, when suspicion of Islam was so rampant in this country, I hosted the biggest, largest Last Supper style dinner. I wish you had been there because you would have loved it. It was called Cordoba Bread
Hmm.
Fest, and I brought 300 Muslims, Christians, and Jews together, and we sat across these long tables at Saint Bart's church, and
Hmm.
wonderful Protestant church on Park Avenue.
All right.
And we sat across and we had this deep conversation. We broke bread together. And at that time, this is post 9/11, we were trying to envision a different future together. We never thought this moment would come. That was actually a great moment. And in your book, you mentioned that even Jesus's last act was hosting a dinner for his
Dinner
disciples.
party.
Yeah. And so I know that you throw these wonderful dinners together. I wanted to end with that and have you explain what these dinners mean, and should we be having like communal dinners now?
Well, I once wrote a short column during the holidays for the Washington Post called "The Sacred Table,"
Mm.
because I really do believe that the table is a sacred place, and in most religions, it's a sacred place.
Well, the kitchen is a sacred place, right? That's where
That's
family
right.
comes together. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, there's nothing more important than gathering people that you love and you care about. But I love to entertain because I loved having people sit around my table and have great, meaningful conversations and laugh a lot and get up and leave feeling better than they did when they came in. And I had the nicest compliment I ever had was a dinner party I had several years ago. A friend of mine who was quite shy, he wrote me and he said, "I left your house feeling enhanced and ennobled." That was the nicest compliment I could ever have had because that's how I want all my guests to feel. I want them to feel like they belong and that they are part of my sacred table and they are part of this sacred community that we have, and that I want to make them happy.
Yeah.
The humor is absolutely essential, especially in these troubled times. My father was in the military, and
Mm.
we moved every year and a half. Every time we'd move into a house, we'd be living on the military post. My father generally was the commanding general. My parents would move in the day of the move with all the packing crates in the living room. My mother and father would have a dinner party
Mm.
that day. And she always
Wow.
had this big pot that she carried with her. That was the first thing she unpacked. And she made this dish called Johnny Mazzetti, which is like noodles and meat and cheese and tomatoes. It was just delicious.
Mm.
And so she would make a big pot of Johnny Mazzetti and get salad and get cookies and brownies and a lot of wine.
Mm.
And they would invite all the commanders. Everybody came in their work clothes,
Mm.
and sat on the floor and served themselves off paper plates. They were the best parties ever. And it just created such a great morale, my father felt. But all
Mm.
these people, commanders who were going to have to work together and maybe go to war together to
Mm.
really get to know each other in an informal way rather than something formal.
So the lesson that we learn from Jesus is Jesus bringing, I mean, he could have just had a meeting outside, but he
Right.
decided to break bread together, sit there, bring the wine, and he was talking to his closest people
Yeah.
and giving parting, words of wisdom and possibly even laying out the vision for a future. I think that we need more of that. Like, I think that we should create a movement of Last Suppers everywhere, where disparate people come together. I mean, why can't we talk to one another anymore, Sally? I mean,
Well,
it's I think that you can poke holes into people's theories because people are, just going along and following orders or doing whatever. And I think the purpose of these conversations is to transform um, people's thinking and try to see where people are actually coming from.
here's the thing, Daisy, you want to have these conversations with people, but you're so shocked at the way they're thinking. And
Mhm.
you want to have these conversations because basically you would like them to think the way you do, which is
Yeah.
you'd like them to think that decency and honesty and kindness and goodness are all important and intelligence are all important. And if you can't get those values and morals and ethics across, there's such a divide there.
Yeah. Yeah. People sometimes transform after they've left you. The thing just kind of like percolates in their minds.
Do you know Tim Shriver? Tim
Yeah.
Shriver,
Yes,
he
yes, of
runs the
course.
Special Olympics. He's created this organization called Unite, and
Mm,
he's going around the country and trying to preach kindness and
mm,
decency, and
mm,
getting people to unite, and get together, and talk to each other from every possible point of view.
mm,
And he's it's making a big difference. He's really trying to make a difference. But he and I have these discussions all the time about how do you unite with somebody that you have don't share your values?
mm, mm.
That's because, I mean, who are your friends? Your friends are people who share your values and your
Right.
morals and your ethics,
Yeah.
and you choose them because of that.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
they don't have that, then it's just awfully hard to be a good friend.
Yeah. And from my experience, because I'm doing a lot of work in, talking about Islamophobia and how to communicate across divides. And one of the things is that most people's beliefs are very hard to change because people have sticky identities in the sense that there are some things they may shake off right away, but there are other things that it's very hard for them to shake off because they have an entire tribe that they have to go back to. In other words, they have a network of people that they can't distance themselves from. It could
Right.
be a person in position of power. It could be any number of reasons where they think they have to go along. It could be family. And so oftentimes if you're speaking to somebody who has a complete, like somebody who loathes Muslims, like if I'm speaking to them, they may come to a realization that they're wrong, but they may not be able to adopt my point of view because their entire family believes something different. So
Hmm.
now they have to go and change those people. So people are hesitant to change and adopt a different point of view because they have to answer to other people. So that's basically why it's difficult. So anyway, as we are concluding, I'd like to see what does finding magic mean to you at this stage in your life?
Well, as I said, mentioned Waldinger's book about how important relationships are in terms of people's lives. Finding magic would be, for me, finding someone to love
Oh, great. So still looking for
and
love.
who love me.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Has to be reciprocal.
Yeah. So it has nothing to do with age. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the cutoff to stop loving?
Yeah, there is no cutoff. No,
Yeah,
no, no. We are, we are wired. We're wired to love. We're wired to give, and we're wired, wired to serve. And
yeah.
and that's. So I'm so glad that Sally, you joined me. And if there's any parting words of wisdom you want to share with this increasingly chaotic world, I'll let you have the last say.
Well, I would say that most people should listen to your podcast because this has been a really great interview and a lot of very thoughtful questions. And, I could talk to you forever, Daisy, but
Yeah.
I think you're doing very good work. And so, I think we should all get out there and talk about how we feel and
Mhm.
what are the things that matter to us and what we think are important for our country and our lives
Yeah.
and the world.
And for the world and to prevent more disasters from
Yeah,
taking place and
right.
from making errors of judgment personally and also as a country
Yeah.
because we are about to make some major mistakes and if we don't rein ourselves in and, speak from a higher place, then all of us are going to go down together.
I agree.
So,
So
thank,
congratulations on your new show.
thank you
I'm
so
sure it's
much.
going to be a big hit.
Well, as they say, inshallah, God willing, right? So, Sally, thank you so much for joining me,
Well, Daisy, it's a real pleasure to be with you today.
and to my friends, here's the book, Silent Retreat. Please buy it. And Sally, and I'll be in touch again.
Great. Thank you for having me on, Daisy.
Thank you for joining me on Wise Women. If something stirred in you today, don't let it stop here. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Reflect on what resonated for you, and definitely plant one seed of change, however small. Remember, you do matter, and your actions have a ripple effect. But none of us can rise alone. To explore more resources and ways to get involved, do visit my website, daisycon.com. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, because every click is your way of amplifying this message to others. Wisdom isn't just heard, my friends, it's lived. So let's live it. Until next time, stay wise and stay rooted.